The 1211th day of the war, Trump had a very harsh rhetoric against Iran and called on Tehran to surrender completely. However, following the statement, the U.S. bombing did not yet fly to strike on Iran. Western media write that this may happen in the near future. At the same time, Tehran, for the second night in a row, could not demonstrate anything, launching another very modest pack of missiles. With each day of slowing down, Iran is weaker and he has fewer options. Donald Trump also made controversial statements on G7. On the one hand, he publicly said that he was not ready to introduce new sanctions against Russia. Macron, according to the French leader, has already said that he can do this and will not hinder the project of Lindsey Graham, which implies a powerful pressure on Russia. But in general, while Trump is obviously concentrated in the Middle East, and no words, and even more so actions from him on the war in Ukraine, should not be expected. Russian advance, which has passed the week, has slowed down. This is mainly due to the fact that they have partially managed to stop them in some they report monitoring channels. The offensive of the Russian Federation continues to break through the Ukrainian defense. They fail, despite the incredible intensity of the local assaults, which Moscow loses a huge number of people, what the Russian soldiers themselves report. About this and much more in today's Fresh Report, which you can support with your likes, comments, and subscription to the channel. Especially your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms, so subscribe if you haven't already. You can also support the channel financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and buy NVPN. This is a means of bypassing blocking, which allows you to bypass blocking. The state should not decide what to watch, listen, and read. You can do it yourself. Watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, go to independent media, websites of independent media. Russia is trying to limit all this, and all this can be overcome with the help of NVPN. You can buy it by the links in the description. This is legal in Russia. It is not prohibited. You can buy and use VPNs, and by buying a VPN, you support this channel, for which you have a big, huge, inhuman thanks. Well, we are moving on to what happened in the last 24 hours. Let's start again with the war between Israel and Iran, because it now affects, well, it has a defining meaning perhaps on everything that is happening in the world. Starting with oil, ending with the capabilities of the PVO and the focus of attention of Western countries, which moved from Ukraine at least for a short period of time. And we will hope that for a short period of time, because so far everything leads to the fact that this war can end. Pretty quickly, the actions of Israel specifically against the Iranian nuclear program gave the first serious results. About 15,000 centrifuges installed at the underground plant for depletion of uranium in Natanz were probably seriously damaged or destroyed as a result of Israeli airstrikes, said the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. These are almost all active centrifuges of this plant, which is the largest in the Iranian uranium enrichment program. According to Grossi, this has been hit by the power transmission line, which feeds the underground complex. We estimate that with such a power outage, centrifuges are most likely to be seriously damaged if they are not completely destroyed. Centrifuges rotating at extreme speeds are extremely sensitive to interruptions in electricity supply. In addition to the underground part, there are also the destroyed and located on the surface of an experimental enrichment plant. That is part of the same nuclear complex in Tanzania. However, Israel is unlikely to be able to deal with the more protected Ford plant, says BBC reviewer Frank Gardner, discussing the prospect of the U.S. joining the war. This is what he says. This is a question of 30,000 feet, because this, about 13,600 kg, is our weapon that will be needed to achieve some of the most secret and valuable elements of the Iranian nuclear arsenal, hidden at a depth of 90 meters under a mountain in the town of Ford. The weapon, namely the JBU-57 MOP massive ordnance penetrator, which we discussed with you yesterday, can hit targets at a depth of up to 61 meters underground or deeper with repeated strikes. The US has it, Israel does not. The only aircraft configured to transport this huge but non-nuclear bomb is the US B-2 Spirit bomber, which can carry 2 bombs at the same time. Currently, it is believed that these planes are located at the American-British base of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, about 3,800 km from Iran and within the reach of the B-2. Therefore, if Israel wants to deprive Iran of the ability to create nuclear weapons, it needs to deal with Ford. It cannot do this with the air, but the US could, if they wanted to. The Israeli commandos raid is one of the most risky options. He sees the alternative in this. Many analysts believe that Israel's goal is to attract the US to bomb this nuclear object. But I'm not sure about this because Israel's campaign, in my opinion, is a campaign to force Tehran to personally dismantle the nuclear program. More precisely, there are a bunch of options that Israel is considering and, of course, to bomb Ford with the American forces, one of them. However, actually dismantling the Iranian system in principle is not something that is simpler, but a more probable and long-term option. One thing or another, of course, does not exclude, especially since Iran continues to behave quite stupidly. Its own strike campaign in Israel, whose goal is to terrify the country so much that it refuses to follow its plans, has completely failed. The visit to Iran on the second day looks quite pathetic, and all they can do is endless lies in their media. So for example, yesterday they claimed that they had a strike on Mossad. But even the Z channels sympathizing with Iran began to crazily spread non-fake fakes. By the way, yesterday there was another one which is called F-35 encroachment. Damn, what an absolute story. They again generated a picture. There are all sorts of fragments, but in the middle of the fragments there is something similar to the F-35, and it is absolutely in a normal state. And many joke that it was apparently a dump of the F-35 or something like that. In fact, for me it is a big mystery why Iran continues to try to post neural network fakes and not just use the classic Photoshop. Even I can draw in Photoshop in 3-4 hours. I haven't tried it for a long time, but maybe not 4, but I will need it in a day. I can draw a similar picture of the destruction of the F-35, as if everyone in the emergence of neural networks forgot about the classic Photoshop. In general, this is rather strange, and they continue to be ashamed that absolutely in 3 days even the faith of the allies of Iran was destroyed in their media, their information and social networks, which are spreading. These endlessly generated bullshit, as you may have also seen, destroyed F-35, but there the neural network was a little wrong in size, and in the end there was a bunch of photoshops where there are Stars Wars cruisers. And all that, in general, quite strange information attempts of Iran, well, what to do. In short, even Z channels began to spread these fakes and to check the information, and shots of the strike of the Zalpa of 4 missiles spoiler got anywhere, but not on Mossad. Here is a picture. Where the arrows point, this is Mossad, and where the lights are, these are the places where it flew. There's also video that is declared as a fixation in the gate of one of the flights. In any case, as you can see, the Zalpa of Iran is becoming very few and ineffective. But the main question that interests everyone is whether the United States will enter the war. And yesterday, everyone was ready that at night the American bombers would fly under free bird. At least Trump has wrinkled very terrible faces. The President of the United States wrote in his social network, Truth Social. Now we have complete total control over the sky, over Iran. Iran had good tracking systems behind the sky and other defense equipment. Had a lot of it, but it is not comparable to the things developed and produced in the United States. No one does it better than the good old United States, Trump wrote. He said that Israel is aware of the location of the top leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, but they are not going to eliminate him, at least for now. Trump added that patience is at its peak. In the next post, he called on Iran to surrender. This is a quote. However, the United States continues to prepare for a real participation in the war. F-35 fighter jets took off from Great Britain and headed for the Middle East. So far, there have been no conditions and ultimatums from the United States, except for the threat of interference if American objects fall under attack. At this stage, the United States' participation in the operation seems inevitable if Iran does not capitulate. Apparently, a certain last proposal was made to him on the diplomatic channel. Why doesn't Trump want to participate in this war? I told you yesterday. Let me briefly remind you that the risks are zero. Main work, namely the conquest of the full sovereignty in the sky, Israel has already carried out. Now it is possible to intervene without any damage, take the laurels and restore the completely shabby international influence of the United States over the course of half a year by Trump's rule, since he constantly threats everyone but could not bring any of his threats to the end. Because of this, both dictators and allies stop listening to the US, as you can't just bluff all the time. You need to perform a threat, otherwise you will look like a clown, like Vladimir Putin. Well, out of the pleasant, Trump has pushed the head of the intelligence service, Choose Gabbard, who promoted it himself. You probably saw a message that Iran was not close to a nuclear bomb or something like that, with links to a representative of American intelligence. Apparently, this is her work and her personal report, since Gabbard is a former sadist. She justified the actions of Bashar al-Assad and also denied the use of prohibited weapons, so that it was proven by specialists from all over the world that he used it. Thus, literally a fan of many bloody regimes, some of which are the enemies of America, became the head of intelligence. The mystery of holes, but according to sources, at Trump's meeting with representatives of the National Security Council, the head of intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was absent. If the head of the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, is just an alcoholic and an idiot, then Tulsi Gabbard is literally the enemy of the United States and all allies of the country. I hope that as soon as possible she will lose her post, because it's just dangerous. She disinformationed the public and the President of America, whatever moron he was, and did it it long before her appointment. So I really hope that Tulsi Gabbard will leave the White House at all. Because it's natural, well, I don't know. Anyway, in Russia, the head of intelligence would have put, I don't know, Budanov, well, not like a traitor Budanov, but an active Budanov. It's just absolute madness and the absolute crap that the Senate has allowed, including the Republicans. They were there for a long time, including J.D. Vance, but this is absolute madness. Well, that is, you can't do that. Well, that is, this is simply a neglect of national interests, including mine as an American. That's why I hope that Tulsi and Gabbard, of course, will fly away after all this, because this is just madness. Well, as for Iran's nuclear program, then again, watch a dozen thousand videos on this topic, read a dozen thousand articles. Everything that Iran does with nuclear objects is needed only to create nuclear weapons. They enrich uranium much more than it is needed for a peaceful nuclear program. Meanwhile, against the background of the sluggish European calls for de-escalation, the Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz spoke quite sharply, who gives respect to Israel for attacking Iran and considers it as a service to his Western allies. This is dirty work that Israel does for all of us, said Merz in an interview with ZDF at the G7 summit in Canada. I can only say that I feel a lot of respect for the Israeli army, the Israeli leadership, who have the courage to do this, added Merz. Merz is not the only official in Europe who thinks so, commented the military editor and economist Shashank Joshi. He is the only one who says it aloud. Indeed, in addition to Israel, Iranian nuclear weapons would first and foremost pose a threat to Europe, and the southeast of which is in the zone of the most remote-firing Iranian ballistic missiles. Arslaniar is a scoundrel, what can you say? Just like the Slaniars, these are Ukrainian defenders who continue to fight against the Russian aggressor. Despite the fact that the focus of the attention of many world media and people, in principle, is now dedicated to the Middle East, the war in Ukraine continues, there is nowhere to go. It is very difficult for Ukrainian defenders. Now there is a huge, gigantic, and perhaps the last offensive of Russia. It is very important to help stop it. Therefore, we continue to gather equipment for the group of engineering supply of the 53rd MBRU in AFU. I remind you of their address. Dear Health, we are a group of engineering supply of the 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade from the AFU. We are building a line of defense of our state in the Donetsk direction. Unfortunately, we have to lose in technology. We really need a self-sacrifice for the organization of effective work. We appeal to the community of YouTube and Telegram channels. Michael Nacke and to Michael Nacke personally with a request to help raise funds for self-sacrifice. Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine. Here is the QR code for Monobank. In the description there is a link to Monobank, PayPal and USDT RC20. That is, to cryptocurrency. Crypto Sheiks, welcome. This is an insanely important story because, in fact, it is now that the maximum pressure of the country is going on in Russia. Vladimir Putin's plan is now to try to achieve the maximum in order to break through Ukrainian defense. He thinks that, well, if it works out, I'll capture Ukraine. If it doesn't work out well, we'll always have time to take a truce or something like that. Therefore, it is incredibly difficult for Ukrainian defenders now. Your help is incredibly needed and important. Let's all help them stop Russian aggression together. And in fact, we can help financially in order for them to be able to buy equipment, in order for them to be able to equip positions, because without fortification, there is no reliable defense. So support the collection by clicking on the link in the description, and we are moving on. A little more about Europe, or rather, about the unannounced Russian-European war. Poland is fixing the interruption in the operation of the global Sputnik energy system, GPS, over the Baltic Sea and links it with the actions of Russia. The Minister of Defense of Poland, Władysław Koźniak, told about this at a press conference on Tuesday, June 17, past the RMF-24. In particular, he was asked about the reports of the interruption of the GPS in the north of the country and whether the events were known. We have observed these interruptions. They are also recorded over the Baltic Sea, our allies in NATO countries, both in the Baltic countries and in Northern Europe. Therefore, we react. This activity is connected, according to our data, with the actions of the Russian Federation, including the sabotage activity, said Koźniak Kamish. He added that several weeks ago, a special security committee meeting was held on this issue. General Maciej Klisz, the operative commander, prepared a number of recommendations for military aviation, and we also forwarded all the information to the civil aviation flight control agencies. And the Polish Agency for Air and Navigation Services, noted the Polish minister. Koźniak Kamish also emphasized the need of an increase in hospitality in connection with the increase in the number of cases of signal violations. As the publication tells, the Polish Agency for Air and Navigation Services published an official warning about strong obstacles to the GPS signal in the north of the country. This is more and more a problem for drone operators who complain about difficulties with control and unusual behavior of the devices. We are talking about serious failures of the GPS signal and possible attempts of the so-called spoofing, fake navigation data. In practice, this can lead to loss of control over the aircraft. Transmissions in the GPS signal affect not only the control of drones, but also the air movement. For example, on Monday morning, a passenger plane that was supposed to land in Bydgoszcz and was redirected to Poznan for interference. Let me remind you that these are direct attacks of Russia on Europe's infrastructure. In my opinion, the response to them should be as sharp as possible. They are carried out largely from Kaliningrad. I believe that Europe should respond to this as to military attacks. Maybe not with the bombing of Kaliningrad, but at least with the ultimatum and possibly with the cutoff of the logistics of Kaliningrad from what is called Motherland Russia, although here we are not talking about water obstacles. While this is serious, it is necessary to treat this seriously. This is a matter of the safety of the passengers of the aircraft. We must wait until the first, second, third, fifth aircraft breaks down. We need to act now because these are attacks. These are full-fledged military actions, military aggression of Russia against Europe. But it is clear that Europe will act much more carefully. But will there be an open question at all? It's the background of everything that is happening. Even worse are the steps of the Trump administration in relation to Russia, which the President of the United States is much more fond of than Iran. The Trump administration has stopped the work of an international working group, which was created to develop mechanisms of pressure on Russia to accelerate negotiations on the world in Ukraine. Reiter writes about this with a reference to 3 American officials. The group began to work at the beginning of the spring, the agency notes. However, it has now become clear that Trump is not interested in more confrontation with Moscow, the journalist said. Trump's latest statements prove that the United States can complete its intermediary mission to achieve peace in Ukraine, and the work of the group does not seem relevant, Reiter added. In the end, everyone slowed down because the president was not there, said one of the interlocutors. Last blow to the working group was inflicted about 3 weeks ago, when, within the framework of a large-scale personnel cleanup, most of the employees of the White House National Security Council, including the entire team that was engaged in the war in Ukraine, the sources of the agency said. The very existence of the group had not been reported earlier, Reiter noted. The group was organized and coordinated with high-ranking employees of the U.S. National Security Service, reported journalists. Representatives of the State Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Pentagon, and Intelligence took part in its work. Members of the working group discussed, among other things, the possibility of pressure on the former Soviet republics and other countries of Eastern Europe and Asia to limit the flow of goods to Russia and energy carriers from it. The group's proposal varied from economic agreements to secret special operations, the sources said. According to one of Reiter's reporters, the creation of incentives that would push Kazakhstan into a more decisive fight against the bypass of sanctions was discussed. It is unknown whether Donald Trump knew about the creation of a group and his dismissal. According to Reiter, the termination of the work of this group will probably increase the concern of European allies with the United States about the unwillingness of Trump to fully support Ukraine. Trump's public rhetoric also does not instill any special hopes. The U.S. President at the Big 7 summit in Canada stated that the United States will not introduce new sanctions against Russia until the European countries do so. This did not mean that the politician rated this statement as a hint that Washington refuses to increase sanctions on Russia. New York Times writes that Trump renews relations with Putin against the background of continued disarray with the Allies, but the introduction of joint new sanctions against Russia during the summit was insisted by the countries of the European Union and the United Kingdom. Trump, in response to the question whether he supports the idea of additional restrictions, answered, "Well, Europe says this, but has not done so yet." By the way, he rightly notes that the American president first offered to see how and what sanctions Europe would introduce. When I introduce sanctions against the country, the United States is bypassing a huge amount of money. It's not easy. Let's sign a document. You are talking about billions and billions of dollars. Sanctions are not so easy, said Trump. According to the American president, he wants to continue attempts to advance peaceful negotiations. At the same time, French President Emmanuel Macron told journalists that he discussed with Trump the introduction of new sanctions against Russia, and the American president assured him that Washington was ready for new measures. According to Macron, Trump emphasized that he would not interfere with the consideration of the sanctions proposed by the American senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, which include sanctions for Russian energy consumers. For me, this is very good news, concluded Macron. In general, who said what to whom whom and what is the truth? So far the question is open. Perhaps everything together, and Trump said everything to everyone. He loves to do so. Also at the summit of the Big Seven, Trump said that the exclusion of Russia from the unification and then the Big Eight was a mistake. According to him, if Russia remained in this club, then the war in Ukraine would not have happened. They must allow Russia to return because we must have Russia at the table of negotiations, said the American president. The decision to exclude Russia from the unification, Trump blamed the then President of the United States, Barack Obama, and Canada's ex-premier Justin Trudeau. However, as New York Times notes, this is a mistake because at the time of the exclusion of Russia from the club of the government, Canada was headed by Stephen Harper, not Trudeau. Trump already said that Russia needs to take the Big Seven again in 2018. It was during this summit that a famous photo was taken on which Trump with crossed arms is sitting surrounded by other world leaders. Former Trump advisor to national security, John Bolton, said that the call of the American president to return Russia to the Big Seven indicates that he does not know the history of the unification. According to him, Trump does not understand that Russia was expelled from G7 for the invasion of Ukraine, and the unification itself is a partnership between the commercially developed democracies. Bolton seems to still not understand. In general, I want to note separately that in the coming days, Trump should not expect anything from the Ukrainian track. Barely holds one topic in his head, and several are not a strong task for him at once. Now he is fully focused on the Middle Eastern events, and the questions about Ukraine will only make him angry. What we also saw in the plane when the magazine asked, "What do you think about the shelling in Kiev?" He says, "What shelling?" Well, that is, he is not in this absolutely. Apparently in Kiev they understand this, so they did not react in any way to the broken meeting of the presidents of the United States and Ukraine. And yes, this is quite unfair. The war in Ukraine has not been done anywhere, but this is Trump. He will return to the track of the Ukrainian war after the stabilization of the situation in the Middle East. However, there is also a plus if the United States enters the war against Iran. This will show Putin, and not only him, that the threats of the American president are not always empty. And his already meme 2 weeks, which have passed 3 times, at some point can really turn from gingerbread bread, but we will not rush forward. In Ukraine, calculations of the victims of the Russian attack continue on the night of June 17. In Kiev, yesterday evening, they continued to extract bodies from the ruins of the 9-story building in the Solomensky district, which the Russian rocket passed through and reached the basement. Only at this place did they find the bodies of 11 people, and in total 16 were killed in Kiev and 134 were injured. Cassette ammunition was also used for the attack on Kiev. Most likely, we are talking about special bayonets of the H-101 cruise missiles. Z channels claim that ammunition warehouses were attacked in Kiev, and that some videos allegedly show secondary detonation. I don't know, it doesn't seem obvious to me from the published footage, especially since anything can be detonated on warehouses, up to household chemistry. Here, it would be possible to pass by as another general statement of the Z-men that they were the ones who were hit there, or if the Ukrainian channels, including Ukrainian warplanes, Stanislav Bunyatov, had not spoken out in favor of the version. The only question I have, he wrote, is why to accumulate a set of ammunition on the warehouses so that it would be F***seek it up by him, and he would detonate until the morning. If there is a severe shortage of ammunition on the front, F***CKU, he wrote. Here I will again allow myself to doubt. If the detonation continued as Bunyatov writes until the morning, then there would probably be videos shot in a brighter time of day, but instead of them, this channel is spread only by translation screenshots of Bunyatov's post. Some of them are added to the screenshots of the Ukrainian volunteer Sergei Prichala, who allegedly lit the drone warehouse in the hangar of the National Aviation University against the background of a typical plane, and allegedly that's why the hangar was hit. But at the same time, there is no proof that the hangar itself has been hit. Version is based only on the fact that in the course of the attack the now dormitory was attacked. His version was expressed, for example, in the channel Rozvedka No, writing the following, and now for combat military insiders. We report that there was no BK warehouse. There were cassettes. A cassette tier, not BK detonation. Absolutely different things. As for the photo from Prichala, the photo was taken 4 months ago and not 12 hours ago. The report is over. They complete it. In general, the version of what was hit in Kiev looks a bit strained, even despite allegedly confirmation from the Ukrainian side. It should also be noted that I do not blame Bunyatov in any case. The man processes a bunch of insiders from different directions in parallel with the execution of his officer duties. It is quite possible that some % of such information may be unverified, which minimizes its value as a source. Moreover, the overwhelming majority of Bunyatov's messages and other Ukrainian military ones, which I read, are eventually confirmed by other sources or data of objective control. I have, in principle, a fairly clear criterion of attitude towards sources. I try to use sources on the topic on which they have an objective opportunity to obtain information. For example, Tatsa Bunyatov is, of course, better informed about what is happening at the front line than someone, I don't know, a resident of Kiev. Yes, because he, in fact, is at this very front line and communicates, including with soldiers. From the point of view of his analysis of the explosions, I don't understand from his posts. Is it his insight, that is, someone told him about it, or he watched the video, it seemed to him that there was secondary detonation, and he made such a conclusion. Therefore, I cannot say here unambiguously what it is, that is, his opinion or his information. These are two big differences. The second is that there really were explosions of ammunition in Kiev, until the data that exists do not confirm this. And the third is that, of course, it all sounds and always looks a little different. That is, additional sources of information that could clarify the situation. What we have seen for sure is an ironed multi-story building and an ironed one purposefully. This is not a Ukrainian air defense missile, not a shot-down Russian missile. This is a Russian missile that pierces a multi-story building that killed civilians, killed people. In Odessa, it is known about 2 dead and 17 injured. Houses in the historic center of Odessa, as well as a kindergarten, an infectious disease hospital, and a children's inclusive center, were damaged. Local authorities reported, after the Putin operation, the far eastern Ukrainian airbase became the main location of the dislocation of almost all the remaining strategic bombers Tu-95 MS-37. The launch of the BORTE rocket from their flies to airfields near Ukraine, then a combat takeoff and return to Ukraine. I wonder what kind of wear and tear the BORTE will have and how long they will be able to fly. As we see, the consequences are not limited to the destruction of the BORTE, and now the plane in Ukraine is extremely boring, so to speak. Now let's move on to the line of combat contact. In the Sumy direction, the deep state fixes the advance of the AFU in the area of Yalonovka. At the same time, in other places, the enemy manages to hold back, says Ukrainian military officer Stanislav Bunyatov. In some parts of the Sumy direction, the advance of the Russians was able to stop, he writes. Yunukovsky district remains tense. The enemy has a move, Bunyatov admits. Deep State continues to cover the painful topic of the Ukrainian fortifications, this time talking about the defense line in Sumy, where everything is much less unambiguous than on the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions. There, I remind you, there are fortifications, and they are not bad. Earlier, we talked about this in detail in the photos in Deep State. See the post of yesterday's photo if you missed it. In September 2024, we were in the Sumy region and stopped at the site where fortifications were being prepared, says the analyst. In order not to indicate the exact distance and location, let's say that they're located about 20-25 km from the state border, that is, in the depths of the territory. The photos taken in this post show that there really are fortifications in the Sumy region, and they were really built. But unlike the Dnipropetrovsk region, this construction raises many questions. On the one hand, you can see the underground support points and trenches, which are covered with a mesh from FPV drones. But to the engineering barriers, which are an effective deterrent factor of the enemy, at that moment were taken care of. And if you compare it with the Dnipropetrovsk region, then just a row of dragon teeth in the field looks too simple and cheap. According to some fighters now having forgotten the anxiety, they are trying to strengthen this line, but we do not have confirmation of this yet, says Deep State. But there's another important question that the society asks and which we were also interested in. Engineering fortifications in the border zone of Sumchina and Kursk Oblast. During the demonstration of the FS on the territory under the control of the enemy, we had a problem. How to demonstrate what is not there, the authors of the project continue. Therefore, we decided to show satellite images from April 25 to 25, on which it is clear that the fortifications on the Zhuravka area, Novnaya Basovka, are completely absent. They are absent in the valley of Cotton, Pisarivka, Kianets, Korpivchina, Yunukovka, and the Russians know about it very well. Therefore, there is a corresponding pressure on this area by the forces of a large number of infantry. In communication with the military, all these observations were fully confirmed. Of all the buildings, only the positions that the fighters arranged for themselves were present, suitable for living and maintaining their zone of responsibility. This was also possible to see in public shots during the enemy's advance near the border. Unfortunately, there was not even an elementary engineering barrier in the form of anti-tank. Mines that could become an obstacle for the enemy. The mining of the sites was carried out directly by brigades in places, and this gave certain results, which was also possible to see in public shots where motorcycle riders flew into space. However, we decided to take into account another factor that could. interfere with the construction of such structures along the border zone. Constant strikes of drones from the side of the enemy. During our trip to the Kursk region, the Russians actively used lancets and other means of destruction of various vehicles on the march. So even at the entrance, this area was dangerous, and the question arises whether it was possible to build an IFS. Holding the territory on the Kursk region in communication with the fighters, they answered that it was possible since the activity of the enemy was not higher than now, let's say on the border of the Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions. In addition, the attention of the Russians at that time was focused on the other, mainly on the work on the technique of the infantry to reflect the offensive. So at least some engineering barriers that could have detained the enemy could be built. As a result, we can say that the indignation of society about the construction of the FSS in the Sumy region is quite justified and logical. These problems cast a shadow on the successful results of the construction of defense in other areas, as well as continue to instill distrust of society to these processes. So it is worth paying attention to Sumchina, because now it is one of the direct consequences of what happened. But we also want to emphasize that this is not the main and not the only problem, because there are also difficulties with human resources, which we have written about more than once. As well as with the means of defeat, in particular with FPV drones on the optofiber, I conclude my post and finish my post deep state. It should be noted that the Russian military in Sumchina also has a hard time. Ivan Filippov, the author of the channel on the Western Front of Unchanged, found another continuation of the story about local assaults in the Sumy direction, which I have already touched on earlier in my photos. It tells the story of an already familiar assault vehicle with the nickname Afghanets. Here it is. Hello, I am Afghanets, the same assault vehicle that under the Sumy at the moment performs a combat task by Andrew Riley. Everything that Riley says, everything is from my mouth. I'm trying to prove the truth, but I can't, because instead of me they wrote a report not from my name, but the commanders themselves wrote. Zampolet with the nickname Wind of the BMP pressed on me, as well as the commanders who arrived on June 10. There's a witness to what happened with the nickname Hasid. He entered the second group of 8 people. His entire group became 300 because of the commanders who pushed them through the minefield and forest. All 7 are 300. After that, at night, I counted another 126 cannons. There too, they self-exploded on the TMK, the bells, and much more. For the assault, during the assault, we were not supported by artillery. There were no birds, nothing. Because of this, the commander of the second platoon, Bart, died. On the radio, I personally heard how they were pushed forward. The guys were exhausted. They were not being thrown food or water, due to which they had no strength. They were lagging behind us for 3 hours. Then, in order to push their group, the commander of the second platoon of the BMP, the second platoon with the call Bart, got out of his mind and ran to support us from the last forces. As a result, because of the misplacement of the chosen route and without the help of the birds, he exploded in the mine. His legs were torn off and he shot himself. Or, as a boy with the call Lost was sent for the sake of a video report for command to the minefield. He walked 800 meters from the cover where Kamikaze met him. Before the death, he said, "Glory to Russia." There were a lot of money in the mouth, as it seemed to me. Before the assault, we asked for gray because the tank and comrade flew one after the other. But we were safely told, if you don't go, you're all 500s. I honestly don't know what to do anymore. I want to get justice and take revenge for all those who died, whose deaths are on a wide and different command. The second group, which started cleaning up the village from my mouth, was called the 500s in another part. They were sent to the red zone to be cleaned up for help after they were unambiguously declared cowards. They had to walk 100 km without evacuation to our safe location. Fortunately, the guys got there alive and well. But before they arrived, I saw how the commander with the call sign Strong applied force to his coworkers. After cleaning up the village, we carried our brothers to the evacuation without support. We wrapped them up and carried them to the evacuation site for 5 km while the other company threw their own. We also sent other guys from other units. They were taken out of the 300s. After that, we were evacuated by boat. Later, when the guys I worked with in the group arrived, they were on vacation long-term and short-term. Therefore, they believe that they will get a vacation and do not want to talk about what happened. Some simply do not want problems. But there's one person who can confirm all my words. This is my soldier, a brother, a worthy warrior with the nickname Hasid. Honestly, I'm already afraid for my life. I'm afraid that they will just nullify me and then make me a missing being, because I have already received threats flooded in the form of hints of nullification and beating. After this message, the evaluation of the Ukrainian military inspector, Konstantin Mashevsev, looks completely predictable. He writes, a whole number of motorized vehicles and units of the North Army of the enemy suffered fatal losses during the offensive in the Sums border, he writes. According to the Russians themselves, in the separate battalions, these units remained 1 or 2 platoons of the combat infantry. In fact, says Mashevsev, Russians are forced to continue active actions in the Sums region primarily due to the units of their air and naval troops. What is obvious? What they are obvious, according to their initial intentions, are clearly supposed to regroup them later on in other directions, considered by Konstantin Mashevitz. Let's move on to Pokrovskaya. There, Deep State fixes the advance of the VSRF in the Gradovka region to the east of Myrnograd. Recall that the capture of Myrnograd from the east remains one of the priority tasks of the VSRF in this direction, along with the advance to Konstantinovka and the breakthrough to Dnipropetrovsk. Plans look very large-scale, and so far not a single part of them has been completely successful, but it is necessary to remember that this particular section can be considered the direction of the main blow of the Russian offensive, since, according to the General Staff of the Soviet Union, it is more than a third of all Russian attacks. In the southern Donetsk region, the Deep State records progress in the AFU in the region of Khamar and Zaporozhye and Fedorovka. Recently, the Ukrainian military observer Mashevitz wrote that due to the overwhelming superiority of the Russians, the Ukrainian Defense Force will hardly be able to hold the section of Khamar-Alexivka, and sooner or later it will have to retreat from a significant territory, at least on the border with Pavlovka-Podobno. That is, already in the Dnipropetrovsk region. So far, unfortunately, this is the scenario, but let's not forget that the Defense Force can surprise and show results contrary to various forecasts. Let's take a look at Prokhorovsky himself. Let me remind you that his different analysts, including the respected ones, handed it over to the Russians last summer, well, last autumn for sure. The Okugor channel brings the statistics of the promotion of the Russian armed forces. Over the past week from June 9 to June 15, during this period, the Russian troops were moving 15 km/h a day, a week earlier, 22 km/h. It seems that the delay occurred due to the fact that the Russians were able to stop in the Sumy direction. Let's hope that such a trend will be preserved, and soon the Russian offensive will be exhausted completely. The lines of the Russian armed forces continue to replenish who got there. The staff of the Kasalapov Sergei military commissary together with Kovykin VO are determinedly proposing to go to war with the inhabitants of the city of Saransk, the Republic of Mordovia. At the same time, they make it clear that they need any volunteers since they are agitated to go to service in the zone of their people without a certain place of residence with drug and alcohol addiction. I can go right now. You will leave in uniform. I can go right now. Are you crazy? Tell me when you will be ready. First I will talk to the woman. I will talk to the woman. I will explain everything to your mother. I will tell her myself. Do you have a military passport? I have it. Moreover, it is not long now. Previous complaints have already been published by the newly arrived contractors who have thus been selected by the military command to carry out the plan. The most diverse ways to get more meat for the war are applied, and quite a long time ago, relatives of the missing military officer, Mitrofanova Alexei, said that he was sent to the SWO in a fraudulent way. I was asked to look for my brother who was sent to the SWO in the 5th autumn. It all started in 1923 when a certain Nail offered Alexei a job as a watchman. In the spring of 1925, his mother and sister found out that he allegedly signed a contract and was in the combat zone. In 2023, he met with a group of people from the Caucasian republics who offered him a job as a watchman. He agreed and began to travel to different regions of Russia. He didn't show up at home and rarely contacted anyone. In April 1925, women found out that he had signed a contract with the SSU zone. Unexpectedly, he didn't explain his actions. Alexei's name was completely changed. Documents were signed in the name of Gromov Vladimir Yurievich. A military ticket was issued, although Alexei did not serve in the army and was not fit for health. The family is sure that Alexei did not sign the contract voluntarily. Alexei's mother says that the sons were kept in isolation, were not allowed to contact, and later he was on the bus heading to the front. I saw that the walls were like in a shed. In the end, we found out that he was being taken to the bus for the war. According to the family, documents, bank cards, and even access to the salary remained with those who lured him to work. All the money is now being received by someone named Nail, the same person through whom, as stated, the contract was signed. That is, the brother was sent to fight, and this Nail owns all his finances. Cards, trust, passport, I don't know what else. Mother and daughter Alexei don't know where he is now and can't get in touch with him. They called for help to the public and asked to figure out the situation, establish Alexei's location, and find out how the man was in the combat zone without voluntary consent. And such stories, hidden in the BUSIFIC EONs, go on and on. The father of 3 children was kidnapped, registered for war with Ukraine, and wanted to zero out as a deserter. The resident of St. Petersburg paved Pavel, a well-known astro, was, according to his relatives and lawyers, illegally mobilized and sent to the combat zone. This is said in their statement, which turned out to be an astro. According to the document, on March 2, 1924, Pavel turned to the police department with a statement about the hijacking of his passport. A month later, on April 11, an unknown man, using personal data, signed a contract for passing the military service from his name through the selection point for the military service for the contract in St. Petersburg. These circumstances were revealed only after Pavel was arrested in April 1925 and placed in the center of the search of military personnel in the village of Kamenka, Leningrad region. Since then, his relatives have been claiming that Pavel is a man under the threat of physical violence. He was forced to be sent to the front in the lineup of the 2009 Assault Regiment, Part 290-298. Previously, the man did not go through military service, did not take into account the psychological dispenser, did not have a criminal record, and also had 3 minor children and had a permanent job. The military ticket, based on which the contract was supposed to be signed, was registered on another name. According to the relatives, Pavel was repeatedly transferred between the military units to probably confuse the traces. Despite the numerous appeals of the lawyers, the General Prosecutor's Office, the main military prosecutor's office, the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation, the Ministry of Defense, the relatives did not receive any answer. Now Pavel, according to the master's data, is at home. The unknown who signed the contract for him is allegedly being investigated. Finally, about the new elite. A man who was moving on a stroller killed a neighbor dog and beat its owner. Residents of the Colored City complex in St. Petersburg complained that a 25-year-old man with an amputated leg who was moving on a stroller and who is an invalid of the CPSU for several months terrorizes his neighbors together with a neighbor. The police do not respond to the claim of the residents of Astra have told. According to the residents, Vili Kravtsov and his companion Daria Gavrilova, who rented an apartment in one of the courtyards, had repeatedly had drunken fights and was also allegedly noticed under the influence of drugs. They repeatedly asked for money from their neighbor, Alexander. According to him, the disabled man could not refuse out of politeness. On May 20, Kravtsov and Gavrilova once again asked the neighbor for money, but he refused. After that, they broke into his apartment, knocked down its owner, tore off the chain from him, took all the food from the refrigerator, and according to witnesses, threw out of the 13th floor his tortellera, nicknamed Cake, which unfortunately died on the spot. Kravtsov and Gavrilova are still not detained. They don't leave the man alone. They chase him, break into the door, threaten him, watch over him in the entrance. At the entrance door, they scared the neighbors, the children. It looks like there's a whole gang of drug addicts, said Astro, a resident of the complex. Is it true that Kravtsov lost his leg in the war? She refused. This can be used as a discredit for the Russian army, she said. The residents of the house also said that this is far from the first incident with the participation of Kravtsov and Gavrilov. Last year, the hero of the war allegedly threw the TV out of the window and miraculously didn't get into people. Astro tried to contact suspects in the murder of a dog, but they didn't answer the journalists' questions. Sometimes Russian army fighters are engaged in socially useful mutual liquidation. In the occupied Makivka in the Donetsk region, a military man caught his wife with a lover, took him to the field and shot him with a machine gun. The lover also served in the army. In the evening of June 10, in the apartment on Lenin Street, 31-year-old Vadim caught his wife with another man. Husband beat his opponent, 36-year-old Andrei, put him in a military UAZ and took him to the village of Yasenovka. As it turned out later, the trip for the lover was the last one. In the Lunya Street, Vadim pulled out an opponent in the field and shot him out of the machine gun, after which he hid. Later, Andrei's body was found on this site with a gunshot wound on his head and the UAZ, which was already burned. According to the database, the military officer is not detained yet. Unfortunately, local residents continue to suffer from the actions of the Russians in the occupied territory. The military officer was stabbed by a 92-year-old pensioner in the occupied Kremlin. Military man from the Kurgan region, 27-year-old Alexander Zakharov, is suspected of the murder of a 92-year-old woman. The body of the resident of the Kremlin, Katerina Ensrai, with cut wounds on the neck and viscous wounds of the eye, was discovered on June 11, Astro found out. Zakharov is detained and is in the detention center in Lugansk. A criminal case on the murder case has been initiated. According to sources, the suspect serves in the military unit 12274. He was expecting confession. What caused the murder of a woman is not known. And this story is only for a few days. I remind you to stay away from Russian military. They threaten everyone. I mean, they are absolutely pathetic soldiers who fought in the fascist or are still fighting in the fascist occupation army. They have no morals, no limitations, nothing. Endless hatred and evil, especially those of them who, as a result of this war, became colleagues of the past who drink and bet, and there is nothing more in their lives. Stay away, move, call the police, distance yourself. They threaten your life and the lives of your animals. This was Michael Nacke, and see you soon. Bye.
А с вами был Майкл Наки, и до скорых встреч, всего доброго. Пока.